The first board I ever cut for Vance Woodworking was on a borrowed saw in a damp garage. The splinters in my palm felt like a promise, a tangible commitment to building something that would outlast me. 30 years later, I stood in a sunlit conference room, the scent of rich mahogany and fresh coffee in the air, watching my daughter Chloe sign the papers that would make her a partner. I thought it was the proudest day of my life. I was wrong. My name is Arthur Vance. At 62, I believed I had built something solid, something permanent. Not just a business, but a legacy. Vance Woodworking wasn't just a company. It was the physical manifestation of my love for my late wife, Eleanor. We started it with nothing but a desperate hope and a shared belief that if you crafted something with integrity, it would endure. She handled the designs, her sketches filled with graceful, flowing lines, and I handled the business, the numbers, the grit. Our motto, born over a late-night dinner of cheap pizza, was simple: craft something that lasts. When cancer took Eleanor 5 years ago, the light in the workshop dimmed. The grief was a heavy, silent blanket. But Chloe was the reason I kept going. She had her mother's eyes and her artist's soul. She stepped into the design role, not out of obligation, but with a passion that made my heart ache with pride. We weren't just father and daughter. We were partners. We were rebuilding our shattered world, one custom furniture piece at a time. The day she became a partner was the culmination of that dream. I handed her the engraved brass nameplate for her office: Chloe Vance, lead designer and partner. She hugged me, and for a moment, I could feel Eleanor there with us, her approval warming the room. "We did it, Dad," Chloe whispered. "We really did it." But even in that sunlit moment, a shadow lingered. His name was Julian. Julian was Chloe's fiancé, a branding and synergy consultant, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was charming, sure, always dressed in clothes that cost more than my first truck. He'd started coming by the workshop, offering unsolicited advice. "This place has so much potential," he'd say, waving a hand at the stacks of aged oak and maple. "But the brand feels dated. Rustic is one thing, but have you considered a pivot to minimalist futurism?" I remember once, he pointed to our original logo, a stylized oak tree I'd designed with Eleanor, and asked, completely serious, "Wouldn't something sleeker, more abstract, better capture the aspirational demographic?" I had just stared at him, a knot of cold dread forming in my stomach. He didn't see the history in that logo, the years of struggle and love. He saw an asset, a brand to be leveraged. That should have been my first red flag. But when Chloe looked at me, her eyes full of the same fiery passion her mother had, I pushed my doubts aside. I told myself I was being an overprotective, old-school father. She was happy. That was all that mattered. I would have given them the world. Little did I know, at her wedding, they would try to take it from me in the most cruel way imaginable. Have you ever trusted someone with your life's work, only to have them use it against you? If you understand that pain, you know why I had to do what I did. Remember to subscribe to Silk Vengeance Stories for more tales of hard-won justice. The wedding plans began innocently enough. Chloe wanted something elegant but personal, and I was determined to give it to her. I saw it as my final, grand gesture as the father of the bride, the last piece of the foundation I was building for her. I sat them both down in my study, the very room where Eleanor and I had first sketched out the business plan for Vance Woodworking. "Whatever you want," I told them, my voice thick with emotion. "The sky's the limit. Your mother, she would have wanted this to be perfect." Julian's eyes lit up with a calculating gleam that I mistook for shared excitement. "Arthur, that's incredibly generous," he said, his hand resting possessively on Chloe's knee. "We were thinking of the old Whitmore estate. It has the history, the grandeur. It's the perfect backdrop for the Vance legacy." I should have heard the warning bells in that phrase, the Vance legacy. In his mouth, it sounded like a marketable commodity, but Chloe was beaming, her face alight with joy, and that was all that mattered to me. The initial budget was $80,000. A substantial sum, but I had planned for it. I'd set aside a fund years ago, a nest egg of stocks and bonds for this very occasion. But with every meeting, Julian's vision expanded. The Whitmore estate wasn't enough. We needed a custom-built clear-top marquee with integrated LED lighting for the dance floor experience. Local flowers were swapped for exclusive, imported orchids that had to be flown in. The menu became a 7-course culinary journey. I watched the numbers climb, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't Chloe's simple, elegant dream. This was a production. But every time I voiced a concern, Julian had a smooth, dismissive answer. Arthur, this is an investment in our future network. The right people will be there. It's about branding our new chapter. Our new chapter, not Chloe's, not even theirs, his. The final budget ballooned to $120,000. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the spreadsheet. This would mean liquidating the last of my personal reserve funds, the money I'd earmarked for traveling the world in my retirement, the trips Eleanor and I had postponed for a someday that never came for her. But then Chloe came over, her eyes sparkling as she showed me the mock-up for the wedding invitations. Isn't it perfect, Dad? Julian says it's going to be the event of the season. I looked at her, my little girl, so full of hope. And I made the choice I had always made. I chose her. I signed the transfers, watching decades of careful savings flow into a single day's extravagance. I told myself it was worth it. For her, everything was worth it. I didn't stop there. During a final planning session, Julian mentioned offhandedly that they were looking at apartments to rent. The thought of my daughter, the heiress to a business built on permanence, paying a landlord forever, was anathema to me. In a move that now feels like tragic hubris, I found a stunning, fully renovated loft in the city's most sought-after neighborhood. I took out a mortgage against my own paid-off home to make the down payment. It was my ultimate wedding gift, a foundation of her own. When I presented them with the preliminary deed, I expected tears of joy. Instead, Chloe's reaction was a subdued, "Dad, you shouldn't have." Julian's smile was tight, almost disappointed. "This is very generous, Arthur, but we were hoping for something with more modern finishes. This feels a bit traditional." In that moment, standing in the home I'd built with my wife, holding the keys to a $450,000 condo I'd just burdened myself to buy, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was pouring everything I had into a bottomless pit, and the two people I was doing it for weren't even grateful. They were assessing. The wedding was in 3 weeks. I told myself it was just pre-wedding jitters, that I was being overly sensitive, that after the wedding, things would settle into a new, happy normal. I was a fool. The wedding budget started at $80,000. But Julian had a vision, he said, a narrative. And narratives, apparently, require imported Italian marble for the cocktail hour and a drone light show synchronized to a string quartet. I sat in the office of the wedding planner, a woman named Serena, whose smile was as sharp and polished as her diamond-studded tablet pen. Julian dominated the conversation, spewing buzzwords like experiential curation and tactile branding. Chloe sat beside him, nodding, her hand in his. She interjected occasionally, her voice softer, often overruled by Julian's relentless vision. "Arthur, we're thinking of the seating chart not as a logistical necessity, but as a social algorithm," Julian explained, as if to a child. "We need to strategically place influencers and venture capitalists to maximize our post-wedding network expansion." I took a slow sip of water, the glass cool in my suddenly warm hand. "I thought the point was for our family and friends to celebrate your marriage." Julian's laugh was a short, dismissive bark. Of course. But a wedding of this caliber is a multi-purpose asset. It's the launch of the Julian and Chloe brand. The brand. My daughter was now a component in a branding exercise. I looked at Chloe, waiting for her to roll her eyes, to give me that little secret smile we shared when someone was being particularly pretentious. But she just squeezed Julian's hand and said, "He's right, Dad. It's about building our future." The costs multiplied like weeds. Each invoice was a fresh cut. The initial floral estimate of $10,000 became $35,000. The catering, originally $25,000, ballooned to $60,000. I was liquidating stocks I'd held for decades, watching the numbers in my retirement account dwindle. Every time I questioned a line item, Julian would fix me with that placating, almost pitying look. "Arthur, I understand your generation's frugality, but you have to spend money to make money. The connections we'll make at this event will pay for the wedding 10 times over." But it wasn't just the money. It was the slow, systematic erasure of our traditions. Our sacred Sunday dinners, a holdover from when Eleanor was alive, were the first to go. Sorry, Dad, we have a tasting with the pastry chef. Or, Julian has a networking event we can't miss. Then, she stopped coming to the workshop on Saturdays. She'd always loved the smell of sawdust, the sound of the planer. Now, she was too busy with dress fittings and brand alignment meetings. The office we shared felt empty. Her drafting table, once a chaotic explosion of sketches and samples, was neat and sterile. She was moving her work to a co-working space, she said, better for collaboration. The final blow came 3 weeks before the wedding. I called her, wanting to finalize the father-daughter dance song. We'd always joked it would be, "You've got a friend in me." An hour later, a text arrived. So busy. Julian and I have chosen a song. It's more in line with the overall aesthetic. Don't worry about it. I stared at the screen, the words, "Don't worry about it," feeling like a door slamming shut. I was being managed. I was no longer her father. I was a stakeholder, and a difficult one at that. The gilded cage of the wedding was being constructed around me, and I was the one who had handed them the key to the lock. I was paying for my own exclusion, financing the very forces that were pulling my daughter away. We often ignore our instincts for the ones we love. Can you think of a time you did the same? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The week of the wedding, the silence became a physical presence in my house. I tried to call Chloe twice, just to hear her voice, to offer some fatherly reassurance. Both times, it went straight to voicemail. My messages went unanswered. The last one I sent, "I love you, sweetheart. Can't wait to walk you down the aisle," was left on read, the 2 blue ticks a silent verdict. The morning of the wedding, I dressed with meticulous care. The suit was new, a dark charcoal gray. The tie was the one Chloe had given me for my birthday 6 months prior. "For the wedding, Dad," she'd said, her kiss on my cheek feeling like a promise. Now, tying it in the mirror of my sterile hotel room, the silk felt like a noose. I drove to the Whitmore estate, the weight of the day pressing down on me. In my inner suit pocket, I carried 2 items. The first was my father's old pocket watch, a family heirloom he'd given me on my own wedding day. The second was a small, velvet box. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings that had belonged to Eleanor. I had planned to give them to Chloe as my personal gift before the ceremony, a piece of her mother to carry with her. The estate was swarming with staff and vendors. It was a well-oiled machine, and I was an extraneous part. I saw Julian near the main hall, barking orders at a florist. He looked polished and utterly in control. He saw me and gave a curt, dismissive nod before turning back to his work. I was just another guest, a very expensive guest, but a guest nonetheless. I wandered, looking for Chloe, the velvet box a heavy secret in my pocket. I found her in the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids, a cloud of hairspray and laughter. She was a vision in her gown, a breathtaking confection of lace and silk. For a moment, my heart swelled, and all the doubt and hurt melted away. This was my little girl. "Chloe," I said from the doorway. She turned, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a polite, public smile. "Dad, you look handsome." I stepped forward, pulling out the box. "I brought these for you. Your mother's." "I can't right now, Dad," she cut me off, her voice breezy. "We're in the middle of photos. Julian has the photographer on a tight schedule." "Maybe later?" The bridesmaids tittered nervously. One of them, a girl I didn't recognize, gave me a look of pity. I felt my face grow hot. The box felt foolish and heavy in my hand. I was an interruption, an inconvenience. "Of course," I mumbled, slipping it back into my pocket. "Later." I backed out of the room, the door closing on their resumed laughter. As I walked away, the hollow feeling in my chest expanded. I was the ghost at this feast, the bankroller being gently ushered to the sidelines. The gilded cage was complete, and I was finally, fully, trapped inside it. The ceremony was in 30 minutes. I had to take my place, put on a smile, and give my daughter away to the man who had already taken her from me. But as I walked towards the ceremony site, I turned a corner into the main guest corridor, and that was when I saw it. The world stopped. The laughter from the bridal suite, the distant string quartet, the hum of conversation, it all vanished, replaced by a roaring silence in my ears. Hanging from the grand archway leading to the seating area, impossible to ignore, was a massive banner. Hanging from the grand archway leading to the seating area, impossible to ignore, was a massive banner. It was at least 25 feet long, a swath of immaculate white fabric that dominated the opulent corridor. But it wasn't the size that froze the air in my lungs. It was the image. My own face, blown up to near life size, smiled back at me from the center of the canvas. It was a photo from a vacation we'd taken just the previous summer, a week in the mountains where we'd laughed and hiked, and for a few precious days, felt like a family again. Chloe had taken that picture. My expression was one of unguarded, genuine joy. That joy was now the centerpiece of my humiliation. Beneath my smiling face, in stark, brutalist black font, were the words, "This man is not welcome at this party." The world didn't just stop, it shattered. Sound ceased to exist. The cheerful murmur of the 400 guests filing into the ceremony space became a distant, muffled roar, as if I were submerged in deep water. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I could feel the cold weight of Eleanor's earrings and my father's watch in my pocket, each a heavy anchor to a past that had just been obliterated. My brain, reeling, tried to find a rational explanation. A terrible mistake. A sick joke by a stranger. A nightmare. But then I saw the guests. They flowed under the archway, their eyes flicking from the banner to my face and back again. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. An older gentleman I recognized as a client of Julian's shook his head with a grimace of pity. A group of Julian's friends, sleek and smug in their tailored suits, smirked and elbowed each other, not even bothering to lower their voices. "Damn, Julian actually did it," one of them chuckled. My gaze swept the crowd, desperately searching for Chloe. I found her. She was standing near the entrance to the garden, her arm linked with Julian's. She wasn't looking at the banner. She was looking at me. Our eyes met across the sea of faces, and in that one, crystalline second, I saw it all. There was no shock on her face, no horror. There was a flicker of something discomfort, maybe a twinge of conscience, but it was quickly extinguished. Julian leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she turned away from me, a stiff, deliberate motion, and offered him a tight, complicit smile. It was her endorsement, her silent, public agreement. The $120,000, the $450,000 condo, the lifetime of love, of sacrifice, of being both mother and father. It all crystallized in that moment into a single, searing point of absolute betrayal. This was not a mistake. This was a statement. I had been weighed, measured, and found disposable. The Vance legacy was being publicly executed, and my daughter was holding the axe. I stood there, paralyzed, as 400 people witnessed the murder of my dignity. The pitying stares, the mocking smiles, the whispered judgments, they were all individual lashes against my soul. I was a spectacle. The fool who paid for his own crucifixion. That moment of silent humiliation. It changes you. If you've ever had to hold your head high when all you wanted to do was scream, you know why this story isn't over. Hit that like button if you're with me so far. A memory surfaced through the static in my mind, sharp and clear. My father, a quiet, sturdy man who'd run a hardware store for 40 years, standing in the aisle after a supplier had cheated him. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't crying, he was just still. A man, Arthur, he'd told me later, is defined not by how he celebrates his victories, but by how he conducts his retreats. The weak scream. The victims beg. A real man, he steps back with grace and plans his next move in silence. Those words, dormant for decades, now rang in my ears like a bell. This was my retreat, and I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I took a slow, deliberate breath, pulling the air deep into my lungs. I unclenched my fists, feeling the crescent moon marks my nails had left in my palms. The pearl earrings in my pocket seemed to pulse with a cold energy. They would not be for Chloe. Not today. Not ever. With a clarity that felt almost supernatural, I turned my back on the archway. I did not look at Chloe and Julian again. I did not acknowledge the stairs. I simply started walking. My steps were measured, heavy, each one a conscious act of will. I was a ship navigating a sea of pity and scorn, my gaze fixed on a distant, unseen horizon. The corridor seemed to stretch for miles. I passed the group of Julian's friends. One of them, emboldened by champagne, muttered, "Looks like he got the message." I didn't flinch. I didn't speed up. I let the words dissolve into the air behind me, meaningless and weak. A middle-aged woman I didn't know reached out, touching my arm gently. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine compassion. It was the kindness that almost undid me. For a dangerous second, I felt the hot press of tears. I gave her the briefest of nods, a silent acknowledgement of her humanity in this inhuman place, and kept walking. The main lobby of the estate was a world away, cool and quiet. The staff at the front desk watched me, their professional masks unable to hide their curiosity. The rumor had already reached them. I could feel it. I was the story of the day. I pushed through the heavy main doors, and the afternoon sun hit me like a physical blow. The heat was a shock, jolting me back into my body. My car was parked 50 yards away. It looked like a sanctuary. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Once, twice, a third time. I didn't need to look to know it was Chloe. The messages would come next. Please? Justifications? Orders to return and not make a scene? I reached my car, my hands steady as I unlocked the door. I didn't get in. Not yet. I stood there, leaning against the warm metal, and finally allowed the full, crushing weight of what had just happened to settle on my shoulders. I had lost my daughter. Not to death, but to something far more final, her own conscious choice. But beneath the grief, a new sensation was kindling. It was cold, sharp, and purposeful. It was resolve. They thought they had shamed me. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea that the man they were humiliating was the same man who had built an empire from a pile of scrap wood. They had awakened the founder, the strategist, the survivor. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and the world went quiet. I looked at the grand facade of the Whitmore estate in the rearview mirror. It was just a building now, a very expensive backdrop for a betrayal. I started the engine. The hum was a promise. They wanted me out of their party. Fine. Now I would show them what happened when I started my own. Taking a stand is never easy, but it's necessary for survival. What would you have done in my position? Let me know in the comments. By 7 a.m. the next morning, I was in my lawyer's office, a pot of black coffee between us. David, a man I'd known since college, took one look at my face and dismissed his assistant, closing the door to his oak-paneled office. "Arthur," he said, his voice low and serious. "Tell me everything." I did. I spoke in a calm, flat monotone that belied the storm inside. The banner, the photo, the 400 witnesses, Chloe's complicit smile. When I finished, David leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. "Son of a bitch," he finally whispered, a rare breach of his professional decorum. "Arthur, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Be effective. David, we are going to perform a corporate and financial divorce, and I need you to be the surgeon." He nodded, a grim determination settling on his features. He opened his laptop. "Okay, let's start with the assets. The condo. It's still in my name. The transfer was meant to be a post-wedding surprise. Perfect. That makes it simple. It's your asset. You can sell it. I want it sold. Fast. I don't care if we take a loss. I want it gone by the time they return from their honeymoon." David made a note. "I have a client, a developer. He pays in cash, closes fast. I'll call him. Next, the wedding. I assume there are outstanding payments? 2. The final catering bill and the floral balance. 25,000 total. The transfers are processing but haven't cleared. We can stop them. I'll draft the cancellation notices immediately, citing a fundamental breach of the contract's spirit. They used your funds to facilitate your public humiliation. It's a creative argument, but it might spook them into a settlement rather than a fight." "Do it," I said, Recover whatever you can. Now, David said, leaning forward. The company. Vance Woodworking. This is the big one. You made her a partner, and I can unmake her. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the partnership agreement we had signed. I pointed to a clause, one I had insisted on years ago, thinking it was a formality, a morality clause. It stated that actions bringing the company into disrepute or causing material harm to its reputation could be grounds for dissolution of the partnership. David, having the founder and principal financier, publicly declared not welcome at the wedding he paid for, which is now the talk of the city, constitutes disrepute. It makes me look unstable. It makes the family brand look fractured. That hurts business. David read the clause, a slow smile spreading across his face. Arthur, this is brilliant. It's airtight. We can remove her. We'll have to buy out her shares, but given the circumstances, we can argue for a valuation that reflects the damage she's helped cause. Buy her out for $1, I said, my voice cold. I want her to understand the precise value of her partnership now. David didn't flinch. Noted. And your will? The company shares. Your life insurance. Everything. I want her removed from everything. My life insurance, my pension, my personal assets. I want it all redirected. Set up a trust for the children of my employees. Donate the rest to the local art college in Eleanor's name. David typed furiously. I'll need to contact your financial manager, Albert. I'll call him on my way out. He'll be expecting you. I stood up, the meeting concluded. The man who had walked in, shattered and humiliated, was gone. In his place was a CEO, executing a hostile takeover of his own life. The first call came as I was driving away. It was the caterer, sputtering with rage. I put him on speaker. Mr. Vance, this is unacceptable. We provided a service. You provided a service at an event where the host was publicly ejected, I replied, my voice steady as I navigated traffic. I consider that a failure to deliver the agreed-upon experience. My lawyer will be in touch regarding a partial settlement. Take it, or we can spend the next year in court. Your choice. There was a long silence, followed by a string of curses before he hung up. I didn't care. The first domino had fallen. There's a strange peace that comes after you decide to stop being a victim. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between being kind to someone else or being good to yourself? Share your story below. The next 6 days were a whirlwind of methodical, cathartic action. My hotel room became a command center. David's emails came in a steady stream. I printed, signed, scanned, and returned documents with the detached efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. The condo sale to David's developer friend, Mr. Thorne, proceeded at a blistering pace. We took a $20,000 loss, but the cash was in my account within a week. I transferred it immediately into a new, high-yield account in my name only. The wedding vendors, after some bluster, accepted a settlement. I recovered $15,000 of the $25,000. They knew a legal battle over a single event wasn't worth their time. But the core of my life's work, Vance Woodworking, required the most delicate surgery. David scheduled a special meeting of the board, which consisted of him, me, and Chloe. She was still on her honeymoon, unreachable. We proceeded in her absence. The meeting was brief and brutal. David presented the evidence, photographs of the banner, sworn affidavits from 2 guests who confirmed the public nature of the humiliation, and a financial impact statement projecting potential client loss due to the fractured family narrative. He then cited the morality clause. The actions of partner Chloe Vance have brought the company and its founder into public disrepute, causing measurable harm to the brand's reputation. Therefore, we moved to dissolve her partnership immediately and buy out her shares. I voted yes. David, as the corporate secretary, voted yes. The motion passed. We valued her shares at $1. It was a symbolic execution, and I felt every cut. But I did not flinch. My final stop was Albert, my financial manager. He looked pale as I dictated the changes. Remove Chloe Vance as a beneficiary from my life insurance, my pension, and all investment accounts. And the new beneficiaries? He asked, typing slowly. The Employee Children's Trust and the Eleanor Vance Memorial Arts Fund. Arthur, this is permanent. So was the banner, I replied. That night, back in my silent house, I performed the most symbolic act of all. I took my phone, scrolled past the 67 missed calls and 143 unread messages from Chloe, and went to the settings. I blocked her number. I blocked Julian's. I blocked them on every social media platform, every messaging app. In 10 minutes, I had digitally erased my daughter from my life. The silence that followed was absolute, and for the first time, it felt like peace. The final piece was my will. I visited Mr. Thompson, the family notary. He listened, his old, kind eyes sad, as I instructed him to draft a new will that disinherited Chloe entirely, leaving everything to the charities. Andrew, you are disinheriting your only direct descendant, he said, his professional duty to ensure I understood. I know, I said, my voice steady. Let her receive nothing. I want every dollar I leave to benefit people who value family, not those who destroy it. I signed the new will with a firm hand. There was no dramatic flourish, only the quiet finality of a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was done. The unwinding was complete. I had sold the condo, reclaimed the wedding funds, stripped her from the company, and written her out of my future. The total financial cost was around $125,000. It was the most expensive lesson of my life, and worth every penny. I sat on my terrace that night, a glass of whiskey in my hand, and looked at the stars. I felt no joy, no vengeful satisfaction. I felt clean. I had drawn a boundary in legal ink and fortified it with cold, hard cash. The gilded cage was demolished. I was free, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that when Chloe and Julian returned from their honeymoon, they were about to discover that the Vance legacy was no longer a piggy bank. It was a fortress, and the gates were closed. They returned from Bora Bora to a perfect storm of their own making, tanned, smiling in their social media posts, and utterly oblivious. According to my sister Maeve, who kept me discreetly informed, Julian had rented a convertible for their drive from the airport. He was euphoric, talking about the furniture they would replace in the condo, the minimalist aesthetic they would implement. Your dad's taste is so heavy, he'd apparently said to Chloe during the drive. All that dark wood. We'll lighten the place up, and with the equity in that place, we can leverage it for the startup I've been planning. The Vance name still carries weight, even if the old man doesn't. They arrived at the historic loft building around 5 p.m., lugging suitcases filled with souvenirs and a delusional sense of entitlement. The doorman, an older gentleman named Henry who had always been kind to me, stopped them in the lobby. Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this, Henry said, his voice neutral as he handed Chloe a business envelope. Confused, she opened it. It was a letter from David, on his law firm's letterhead, stating that the property had been legally sold to Mr. Charles Thorne, and that all possessions left in the unit had been donated to charity. Julian snatched the letter, his face contorting as he read. This is a mistake. This is our apartment. A wedding gift. I'm afraid there's no mistake, sir, Henry said, his gaze steady. The locks were changed last week. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne are currently on a cruise, but they'll be moving in upon their return. Chloe, her face pale, fumbled for her phone. She called me. It went straight to a generic voicemail greeting. She tried again. And again. The 68th, 69th, and 70th calls. She stared at her screen, the reality beginning to dawn. Call your lawyer, Julian snapped, his voice rising in the elegant lobby. The one who was handling the transfer. Chloe called their lawyer, a woman named Beatrice, putting her on speaker. Beatrice, what's going on? We're at the loft and they're saying it's been sold. I could imagine the uncomfortable sigh on the other end. Chloe, I tried to reach you during your honeymoon. Your father sold the property. It was in his name. He had every legal right. But it was a gift. A wedding gift. Chloe's voice cracked. Verbal gifts, especially real estate, have no legal standing without a transfer of title. I'm sorry, but there's nothing you can do. Julian grabbed the phone. This is fraud. We're going to sue that old bastard. I would advise against that, Mr. Crestwood. Beatrice's tone turned icy. You have no grounds, and any competent judge would throw it out. I suggest you find a place to stay for the night. The line went dead. They stood in the middle of the lobby, their designer luggage suddenly looking ridiculous and out of place. The fantasy was over. The narrative had collapsed. According to Maeve, who heard the story from a distraught Chloe days later, the argument in the rental car was volcanic. Julian slammed the steering wheel, screaming that she was incompetent, that she should have managed me better, that she'd let a $450,000 asset slip through her fingers. He said the banner was my idea, Chloe sobbed to Maeve. He told me it was a way to establish boundaries, to show you that we were a new family. But now he's saying I insisted on it to humiliate you. The truth, fueled by rage and financial ruin, was finally emerging. Julian's plan had been to isolate Chloe, secure the assets, and then use the Vance legacy as a springboard for his own ambitions. The banner was the brutal first step in severing her from her support system. Now that the plan had failed, he had no use for the narrative anymore. They ended up that night in Julian's cramped, rented apartment, a 500-square-foot box in a building with thin walls and stained carpets. The contrast to the spacious, light-filled loft was a physical blow. The Julian and Chloe brand had launched. All right, it was bankrupt. Seeing someone face the consequences of their actions can be a sobering experience. Do you believe in second chances, or are some lines permanently crossed? Let's discuss. The storm that began in the car continued to rage inside Julian's cramped apartment. Maeve relayed the details to me in a hushed, horrified call. He was screaming. Arthur, she said. He told Chloe she was a liability, that she'd ruined his 5-year plan by not being able to control her own father. Without the gilded cage of the condo and the promise of the company, the facade of Julian's love crumbled to dust. The brand of their marriage was now toxic. In the days that followed, Chloe's desperate attempts to contact me became more frantic. She emailed, she sent letters, she even had a friend try to call me. Every avenue was blocked. She was a ghost in my digital world, and I had made my physical world a fortress. Her final frantic move was to reach out to Maeve, begging for intercession. Maeve, following my instructions, sent her a single, dictated message. Chloe, you publicly humiliated the man who gave you everything, the man who raised you alone, the man who emptied his savings for your happiness. Every action has its consequence. This is yours. Do not contact me anymore. That message, Maeve told me, was met with hysterical sobs. It was the final nail in the coffin of Chloe's denial. She was truly alone, trapped in a tiny apartment with a man whose contempt for her was now palpable. The final, ugly truth emerged a week later. Suspicious of Julian's late nights and secretive phone calls, Chloe went through his tablet, which he'd left synced to his phone. She found it. A portfolio for a proposed new company, Crestwood Ventures. The business plan was a carbon copy of the expansion strategy we had developed at Vance Woodworking, but with all the legacy elements stripped out. It was my life's work, repackaged with his name on it. But worse than the stolen ideas were the messages. Dozens of them. To and from 3 different women, hotel confirmations, romantic dinners, even a weekend trip to a ski resort he'd told her was a solo mindfulness retreat. The timeline stretched back to before the wedding. When she confronted him, his reaction was not denial, but dismissive scorn. What did you expect, Chloe? He reportedly sneered. A woman who betrays her own father for a guy like me? You're not exactly a safe bet for loyalty, are you? You were a means to an end. The end was your father's money and his company. Now that's gone, so are you. He moved out that afternoon, taking his expensive suits and his fragile ego with him. Chloe was left with the silence of the empty apartment and the crushing weight of her own catastrophic choices. She had lost her home, her place in the family business, her inheritance, and her husband in the span of a few weeks. The narrative Julian had crafted was in ashes. All that was left was the bitter, unvarnished truth. She had allowed herself to be manipulated into destroying the one relationship that had been built on unconditional love. She had chosen a gilded cage, and now she was left with only the bars. I listened to Maeve's account, my face expressionless. I felt no triumph, only a profound, oceanic sadness for the daughter I had lost and for the woman she had become. She was now living in the world she had helped create, a world without safety, without trust, and without me. The reckoning was complete. The consequences, like a perfectly crafted piece of furniture, had been assembled, joint by painful joint, and they would bear the weight of her actions for the rest of her life. The first thing I did with the reclaimed money was book a trip to Norway. Eleanor and I had dreamed of seeing the fjords, of standing in the silence of those ancient, carved cliffs. We'd always postponed it for the business, for Chloe's tuition, for 1,000 practical reasons. Now, I was going alone, and the solitude wasn't empty. It was full of a quiet, profound possibility. I stood on the deck of a ferry, the Arctic wind sharp on my face, watching waterfalls cascade down granite faces into emerald water. The scale of the landscape was humbling. My problems, my pain, the entire mess I had left behind, felt small and distant. I was a speck in the grand chronology of those mountains, and the realization was liberating. When I returned, I didn't just go back to my old life. I began dismantling it. The first stop was Vance Woodworking. I called a meeting with my key employees. I told them I was selling the company. There was shock, concern. I explained that the Vance chapter was closing, but I had found a buyer, a larger, reputable firm that would retain every single employee and honor all existing contracts. The relief in the room was palpable. I was not abandoning them. I was setting us all free. With the proceeds, I was more than secure. But purpose, I was learning, wasn't found in a bank statement. I started volunteering 2 afternoons a week at a community center, mentoring young entrepreneurs from tough neighborhoods. I wasn't Arthur Vance, founder of Vance Woodworking. I was just Arthur, the guy who knew about business plans and profit margins. I helped a 2-year-old woman named Maria finalize the loan application for her bakery. I showed a quiet, determined kid named Leo how to negotiate with suppliers for his auto detailing side hustle. Their gratitude was genuine, untainted by entitlement. They saw my time as a gift, not a tax. Helping Maria hang her grand opening sign filled me with a satisfaction that funding Chloe's wedding never had. I also finally enrolled in the woodworking class I'd always put off, a beginner's course in Japanese joinery. There were no business plans, no clients, no legacy. There was just the wood, the tools, and the focus required to make a clean, precise cut. My first attempts were clumsy, but my teacher, a serene woman named Aiko, would simply smile and say, "The wood teaches patience. You cannot rush the truth of the grain." I was learning. I was learning to live for the sake of living, not for the sake of a daughter who no longer wanted me, or a wife I could no longer honor through sacrifice. Maeve kept me updated. Chloe had finalized her divorce from Julian. He'd left the city, his tail between his legs, his grand plans evaporated. Chloe was living in a small studio apartment, working long hours at her architecture firm, and attending therapy. She had not asked Maeve for money. She had not tried to circumvent my blocks. She was, by all accounts, sitting in the silence of her consequences. I felt a distant, philosophical sadness for her, but the raw, gut-wrenching pain had been cauterized. The father who would have dropped everything to run to her rescue was gone. In his place was a man who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is nothing at all. My life had a new blueprint. It was no longer a sprawling mansion built for a family of 3. It was a well-appointed, peaceful studio, designed for one, and for the first time since Eleanor died, I wasn't lonely. I was simply, contentedly, alone. Rebuilding your life after a betrayal is like building a new house from the ground up. It's hard, slow work, but the foundation you pour for yourself is the strongest one you'll ever have. If you're on that journey, know that you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories of resilience. On a rainy Sunday morning in November, a thick manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Chloe's. I would know those looping letters anywhere in the world. I left it on my desk for 3 days. It sat there, a silent specter from a past life. Part of me didn't want to open it. I had found a fragile, hard-won piece. Her words, whether pleas or accusations, had the power to shatter that. But curiosity, and perhaps a sliver of the old fatherly instinct, won out. I made a pot of coffee, sat in my favorite armchair by the window, and finally tore it open. Inside were 8 pages of handwritten script. It began, "Dear Dad, I am not writing to ask for anything. She didn't transcribe the banner incident as a mistake or a misunderstanding. She called it what it was, an unforgivable cruelty. She admitted that while Julian proposed the idea, she had agreed to it. I convinced myself you were controlling because that justified taking your money while pushing you away. It is easier to see a generous father as manipulative than to admit you are an ungrateful daughter. That line, so brutally self-aware, made me put the letter down and stare out at the rain for a long time. She described the collapse of her marriage with unflinching detail, Julian's infidelity, his admission that he had used her, his scorn when the money vanished. She was in the process of divorce, she said, and was not asking for financial help. I hired the lawyer with my own savings. I am not going to ask you to receive me back in your life. I do not deserve that. The final pages were a detailed apology, not for the consequence, but for the action itself. She listed specific moments where she chose Julian over me. Red flags she ignored. I know I destroyed something irreparable. I do not ask for forgiveness because I do not believe I deserve it. Mom would be ashamed of me. I am ashamed of me. She ended with, I love you, Dad. I have always loved you, even when I acted like I did not. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation, for a hidden plea for rescue. I found none. It was raw, honest, and too late. I did not respond. I placed the letter back in the drawer. Words were easy. Sustained change was the only currency that mattered anymore. Weeks turned into months. I continued my life, my painting classes, my mentoring, my quiet evenings. Maeve confirmed that Chloe was indeed living alone, working, and staying in therapy. She was respecting the boundary I had set. She was, it seemed, genuinely trying to become someone new. One evening, David, my lawyer, called. After discussing some minor tax documents, he paused. Andrew, we've worked together for 15 years. I knew you as a competent man, but always worried, always sacrificing. These last few months, I see you different, lighter. It's as if you finally stopped living to please ghosts and started living for yourself. He was right. The ghost of the father I thought I had to be was gone. The ghost of the daughter I thought I had was laid to rest. I was no longer defined by my sacrifices, but by my peace. I sometimes think about forgiveness. I've learned it's not a switch you flip. It's a long, slow process of releasing anger for your own sake, not for theirs. And forgiveness does not mean restoration. I can eventually release the pain of that banner without ever giving Chloe the keys to my life again. My message to anyone hearing this is simple. Your dignity is not negotiable. Love should not require the surrender of your self-respect. The most powerful act of love is sometimes a quiet, firm, and final no. The 25-foot banner that declared I was not welcome ended up being the key to my freedom. It forced me to reclaim my life. Today, I am more alive, more at peace, and more myself than I have been in decades. And that, I have found, is the best revenge possible. A life lived well on your own terms. This journey from betrayal to peace is one that many of us face. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, hit that like button and subscribe to Silk Vengeance Stories for more powerful narratives about reclaiming your dignity. Tell us in the comments, what is the one boundary you're proudest of setting?